Tonight on 24, the Iran-US ceasefire at the crossroads of extension or expiration. Reports point to an agreement on an extension. Tehran says there are no negotiations underway. Trump insists that Hormuz is under American control. Continued international pressure to halt the Islamic Republic's execution machine. 32 countries and the European Union have called for an immediate halt to the death penalty. Reactions to Hossein Taeb's return to the inner circle of power 4 years after stepping down from IRGC intelligence, a track record overshadowed by Israeli infiltration and a series of security failures.
A radiant star among the drifting clouds displays styled sideburns with rich musical tones, yet remains strictly denied.
The passing of Iraj Hossein Taeb silences one of Iranian music's most enduring voices, whose catalog of over 2,000 songs and ballads remains woven into the memories of several generations. From the Iran International Studios, this is 24 with Fardad Farahzad. Iran International viewers in Iran and around the world, hello and good day. With 4 days remaining until the end of the 60-day ceasefire and negotiation window between the United States and the Islamic Republic, Donald Trump has once again reiterated that Washington has full control over the Strait of Hormuz. Meanwhile, despite regional mediators' efforts to continue the talks, a senior Iranian official told Reuters that no discussions have taken place regarding a ceasefire extension, and Tehran fundamentally does not recognize any start date for it. All of this comes as the Anadolu agency, citing a Pakistani source, reported that Washington and Tehran have agreed to extend the ceasefire before the expiration of the Islamabad Memorandum's 60-day deadline. My colleague Samira Garai joins us from the White House. Samira, we are down to the final days of the 60-day ceasefire. There are whispers of an extension, and Mr. Trump also says he has full control over the Strait of Hormuz.
Fardad, actually, the Iranian side doesn't acknowledge a beginning for this memorandum of understanding. They believe it never had a start date, and consequently, they can't define an expiration date for it either. We know that under the memorandum of understanding, its provisions were supposed to be implemented for 60 days, and during these 60 days, both sides were supposed to discuss a more lasting agreement. None of that happened. The agreement or a memorandum was violated, and Mr. Trump had once made it very clear that the memorandum of understanding practically no longer exists at all. However, standing 4 days ahead of that critical deadline set back then, and amid what could perhaps be called positive diplomatic signs over the past few days from key mediators, including the Qataris and Pakistanis, was this implicit acknowledgement from both the United States and Iran that they might want to extend this fragile ceasefire, meaning regarding this 60-day window they had granted each other and repeatedly violated, both sides now want to come to terms on it once again. It seems that these positive signs reflect a commitment.
Well, unfortunately, it seems we've lost our connection with Samira. If possible, we'll return to the White House later on. Meanwhile, Jamshid Barzagar, journalist and political analyst, also joins us from Toronto. Mr. Barzagar, as we reach the final days of this 60-day ceasefire, just as Samira pointed out in this brief conversation we managed to have with her, the Iranian side doesn't consider itself bound at all and doesn't believe the memorandum had a start date to begin with for it to come to an end now. Yes, hello to you, Mr. Farahzad, and to your esteemed viewers. Of course, that memorandum of understanding was met with numerous ifs, buts, and serious doubts from its very inception. This initial skepticism was entirely justified, especially considering the Islamic Republic's long track record in how it has negotiated all these years. During past negotiations over the sensitive nuclear file, we also repeatedly witnessed this exact kind of behavior from the Islamic Republic. Despite the clear warnings that were being continuously given to Trump regarding this reality, he firmly believed that given the recent elimination of the first and second tiers of leadership in the Islamic Republic, things would be fundamentally different, which was something he was initially talking about back then at a time. A third tier had come into power, which, according to him, was wiser, and he basically even went so far far as to talk about regime change, but the course of events showed that those predictions and warnings that had been given were more accurate, and we saw that Trump accepted it too, referring to the leaders of the Islamic Republic as liars, deceivers, and hypocrites. And as it happens, at that very meeting, in fact, when he had gone to Ankara for the NATO summit, he issued the order for attacks again. And he said very clearly that the ceasefire had ended, and nothing was left of that memorandum of understanding. Right there, where, of course, reports of Force One to depart Turkey. These show just how complex relations between Tehran and Washington are, meaning despite the negotiations both sides were talking about, especially the American side, both Mr. Trump and Mr. Vance, who had been talking about the progress of negotiations for a long time. Efforts of this kind were also underway for, say, killing Trump. In any case, what actually happened was that those conditions that the Islamic Republic is now raising, and some of which were in that same memorandum of understanding, were not respected in Tehran's view. A senior Islamic Republic official told Reuters that 48 hours after signing the memorandum of understanding, the US started violating them. At any rate, initially, we know that the naval blockade of Iran's southern ports was lifted, and sanction waivers for the sale of oil and petrochemical products were granted. And there was also talk, in fact, about unfreezing part of the Republic's frozen assets in Iran. But none of these actually came to fruition in practice. Inside the Islamic Republic, there were two views. One was to actually base things on that same memorandum of understanding. Furthermore, it was proposed that key terms previously discussed, specifically lifting the restrictive naval blockade, unfreezing seized financial assets, establishing lasting peace, and securing Israel's complete military withdrawal from southern Lebanon, should serve as the foundational basis for renewed diplomatic negotiations. However, recent developments clearly reveal that the Islamic Republic has since put forward even more stringent preconditions. We first heard these 6 new conditions articulated by Mohammed Bakr Zolkadr and later reaffirmed by Mohsen Rezai. Most significantly, during a critical diplomatic meeting with the Chinese ambassador, Rezai effectively poured cold water on this essential memorandum of understanding, completely shattering the delicate hopes that had previously existed around successfully reviving the framework. He shattered them entirely. In addition to the initial terms that were already put forward, the Islamic Republic has now raised fresh demands, explicitly seeking monetary compensation from the United States, prompting an immediate reaction from Donald Trump. He countered by asserting that if negotiations continue along this path, it is actually the U.S. that should demand restitution from the Islamic Republic. Moreover, another fresh condition that was notably absent from the initial memorandum of understanding and all their previous terms involves the complicated situation regarding the ongoing crisis across the entire Gaza Strip, which today we see Mohsen Rezai has brought up the Gaza issue again. So Israel's involvement, not just in Lebanon, but also in Gaza, will once again be tied to any memorandum of understanding and any agreement between the U.S. and the Islamic Republic. And we know that this situation will, in fact, make things very complex. Israel has openly declared that until the complete disarmament of Hamas, which the Islamic Republic opposes, it will not withdraw from Gaza. In Lebanon, too, the situation is similarly complex. Therefore, the conditions that the Islamic Republic has put forward are practically impossible. Not only is the United States completely unwilling to accept these proposed terms, but key regional player Israel has also clearly demonstrated that it will not abide by such conditions in these delicate diplomatic matters. Looking at the broader geopolitical dynamics from this perspective, it is entirely imaginable, and indeed highly likely, that the current stalemate will simply continue unchanged for the foreseeable future. Of course, the probability of an all-out, large-scale military conflict erupting in the coming days remains relatively low, as neither side currently seeks an immediate devastating escalation. Nevertheless, both primary actors apparently prefer to maintain this deeply fragile, precarious status quo rather than make concessions for a lasting agreement. Consequently, this tense and uncertain environment is expected to just keep going, perpetuating ongoing instability without crossing the threshold into full-blown war. Meaning, the US wants oil traffic through the Strait of Hormuz to keep flowing to some extent so it can control oil prices, but specifically wants to maintain the naval blockade on Iran. This is something that actually puts the ball in the Islamic Republic's court because of the pressure the naval blockade exerts.
Thank you, Jamshid Barzagar, journalist and political analyst from Toronto, Canada. We have re-established connection with the White House. My colleague Samira Garai has rejoined us. Samira, unfortunately, our connection got cut off in the middle of your remarks.
Mr. Trump says that the Strait of Hormuz is completely under U.S. control, at a time when not much commercial traffic is happening right now, whether cargo ships or oil tankers, unless he means the naval blockade of the Strait of Hormuz.
What he means is that same naval blockade. Fardad, I apologize. Because of the extreme heat, the camera completely shut down, so I came inside the White House. What Mr. Trump wrote on Truth Social, that control you yourself are referring to, is that same naval blockade, and he says it's an iron wall. Of course, he had also said many times before that control of the Strait of Hormuz is in our hands. Or other statements, like that by attacking Iran, he was able to bring stability to the energy market, statements whose truth is questioned to some extent by animalists here in the US media. But going further into what he wrote on Truth Social, if we want to take a look at that too, he says, the Islamic Republic can't do anything about my naval blockade. They have no air force, no navy. It's a devastated country. They have no money. The only thing they have is fake news media and runaway inflation. Mr. Trump has brought up this fake news media multiple times during the war, referring to the Islamic Republic's propaganda capabilities and how well they do it. Now he says this same fake news media can push their victory narrative, along with high inflation. Over the weekend we just passed, now a weekend in the West, Saturday and Sunday, Mr. Trump had an interview with Axios, which was an important interview. He mentioned that he wants to keep his policy toward the Islamic Republic very low-key, very quiet. Maybe what Dear Jamshid refers to as muddling through is, from the perspective of the United States, that precise low-key approach. It focuses on moving steadily forward without drawing unnecessary public attention, maintaining a vigilant naval blockade, and relentlessly escalating economic pressure. For Washington, this strategy is no longer about executing massive, dramatic moves, simply for public spectacle. At least that is what Mr. Trump consistently emphasizes in his interviews. He remains far more inclined to sustain this ongoing attrition, believing it will steadily weaken the Islamic Republic, force leadership to the negotiating table, and ultimately enable him to achieve every single one of his strategic diplomatic demands. Thank you, my colleague Samira Garai from inside the White House, this time in Washington, D.C. 32 countries, along with a high representative of the European Union, condemned the execution of protesters in Iran in a joint statement. French Foreign Minister Jean-Noël Barrot said this statement calls for an immediate end to the use of the death penalty in Iran. This statement also calls on the Islamic Republic to release all individuals who have been arbitrarily detained. Mohammed Samadi joins us from Berlin to discuss the European reaction and how much weight their words currently hold in Tehran. Fardad, the reality is that this is the first time that countries around the world on such a scale are demanding a halt to executions, condemning executions, and also calling for an end to arbitrary detentions. We haven't had this before, to this extent, where countries around the world independently step up and put the Islamic Republic under pressure. Maybe back when the crackdowns and killings were happening in day, only a few isolated countries issued statements. Right here in Europe, only 3 countries, Germany, France, and the UK, issued a joint statement calling for a halt to the crackdown. Or, for instance, Canada issued a statement on its own, independently. And later, as the killings and crackdowns continued, we didn't see countries around the world coming together in a coordinated way to issue such a statement. We had statements from UN experts, or there was the fact-finding mission, or, for example, at a UN Human Rights Council level, the European Union issued a statement, and even that was specifically about arbitrary detentions and trials of individuals. However, this time around, the alarming numbers and detailed human rights reports emerging from Iran regarding the surge in executions appear to have made countries across the globe pause and reflect. After facing mounting protests over their initial silence, European nations have finally released an official statement that feels, to a large extent, quite promising, assuming that this active stance continues in the future. In any case, the figures coming out now are shocking. In 2026, from the start of 2026, until now, the Borumand Foundation says 916 people have been executed in Iran, which, if we calculate 224 days up to today, averages out to 4 people executed every single day. And this is deeply concerning. On a global scale, no other nation carries out capital punishment at such an alarming rate relative to its population size. Take the current month of August as a stark example. In just the first 12 days alone, records from the Borumand Foundation reveal that 15 individuals have already been executed, a grim statistic that averages to more than 1 state-sanctioned death every single day. This relentless escalation of capital punishment has sparked widespread international outrage. Governments and human rights organizations around the world are forcefully stepping forward to demand an immediate end to these executions by the Islamic Republic, while simultaneously affirming and standing up for the fundamental right of ordinary citizens to peacefully protest. And they're telling the Islamic Republic to allow people the right to protest, that they want change, and in a way telling the Islamic Republic to let the people fulfill their demands. And finally, there's one more point I'll mention, which is the issue of executions and also the trials that are still ongoing. Thank you, my colleague Mohammed Samadi. 4 years after stepping down from leading the IRGC intelligence organization, Hossein Taeb's name has returned to the headlines again, this time with an appointment by the third supreme leader of the Islamic Republic. And regarding the leadership of the Basij organization, Taeb's acquaintance with Mojtaba Khamenei, of course, doesn't just date back to his years in IRGC intelligence, the Basij, or even his role in Khamenei's office. However, Taeb's 13-year tenure heading the IRGC intelligence organization was also accompanied by a series of the Islamic Republic's heaviest security failures. Among the most major security failures during Hossein Taeb's tenure was the assassination of Mohsen Fakhrizadeh, who was a senior figure in the Islamic Republic's nuclear and defense program, and was targeted despite his security detail. Qasem Soleimani, commander of the IRGC Quds Force, was killed in a U.S. drone strike near Baghdad. Likewise, in 2018, Israel announced that it had accessed the storage site of the secret nuclear archive in Tehran and smuggled a massive volume of these documents out of Iran. Meanwhile, the extensive explosion and sabotage at the Natanz nuclear facility were among the string of setbacks during his era. Between 2009 and 2011, several figures associated with the Islamic Republic's nuclear program were also targeted in Tehran, including Masoud Ali Mohammadi, Majid Shayari, Daryush Rezai-Nejad, and Mostafa Ahmadi Roshan. My colleague Murad Vaisi has joined us from our other studio in Washington. Murad, with a security track record like this, one might think he wouldn't be allowed anywhere near security agencies anymore. What do you think happened that led to his return to power? I think the main reason is that loyalty is the primary criterion, not competence. In the Islamic Republic, loyalty is the most crucial benchmark for who climbs higher. And let me mention one thing. The old guard doesn't get eliminated. People at the table just swap seats. One goes higher, one goes lower. Now with Taeb, there were genuinely massive intelligence failures during his term. When he was dismissed, I looked into it and there were maybe around 27 major intelligence failures. Like the father of the Islamic Republic's missile program, meaning Hassan Tehrani Moghadam, gets killed in a suspicious explosion during the period when Taeb is head of IRGC intelligence. Like Fakhrizadeh, the #1 nuclear figure of the Islamic Republic, gets killed. Like Qasem Soleimani gets killed. All of these are intelligence failures. These intelligence failures, in my view, stem on one hand from Israel's technological, arms, operational, and intelligence superiority, and on the the other hand, it's that in the Islamic Republic, just as 90% of the people, as they themselves put it, have lost faith in the Islamic Republic, many within the establishment have lost faith too. And for example, due to money matters and things like that, they go and become infiltrators for, say, Israel and the US. But as for why Mojtaba brought him back, as I mentioned, it's mostly based on loyalty, because it's well known in Iran that Hossein Taeb has been the closest person to Mojtaba and worked really hard for Mojtaba's succession to leadership. Naturally, he's being rewarded for it now. Regarding some saying his rank has been downgraded, how much do you agree?
Because I don't believe that, and the reason is that the command of the besieged is currently very, very crucial for the Islamic Republic, for two reasons. The biggest reason is that the most critical threat facing the Islamic Republic is the danger of a popular uprising, and the besieged is always at the forefront of crackdown, meaning the ones who crack down in the streets, right on the front lines, are the besiegees and plainclothes operatives tied to the besieged. For this reason, since the Islamic Republic's primary concern is about suppression, they placed Mojtaba's top guy there. The second reason centers on internal dynamics. Even among regime loyalists, a significant portion of the street mobilization seen in recent months was organized and steered by hardline factions like a Haidari Front, seeking tighter centralization. Mojtaba Khamenei wants all apparatuses managing pro-government support directly supervised by an unquestioned loyalist within his inner circle, such as Hossein Taeb. Conversely, for the broader population opposing the Islamic Republic, Taeb would serve as the principal figure orchestrating their suppression. Ultimately, formal titles in this system hold little decisive weight compared to real behind-the-scenes networks of power and personal allegiance. The Islamic Republic is a system where the individual matters, and it comes down to who the leader gives room to operate. I can give another example of it, like Mohseni Ejei, for instance. Back when he was Minister of Intelligence, the Intelligence Ministry was important. Back when he was head of the Special Clerical Court, that court was important. At a time when he was head of the Judiciary, that place became important. It depends on how much the leader values individuals in the Islamic Republic. The title itself doesn't matter all that much. That position can become more important. Right now, there are a lot of positions in Iran that have a very big name and reputation, but I think in the hierarchy of power, they don't really have that much significance. Like the president. The Constitution says the president is the second highest executive official in the country after the leader, but now everyone in Iran knows that there are other people who are far more powerful than the president. Well, it is true that some political positions carry rather vague responsibilities, much like the presidency in the Islamic Republic. But consider a position with measurable duties, like civil aviation. If planes keep crashing, that official would quickly be pushed aside due to clear failures. Now that Hossein Taeb has made a return, despite his very murky track record during his previous tenure leading the IRGC intelligence apparatus, don't you think critics inside the country's security environment, whether in the government's Ministry of Intelligence or the IRGC sector, might start protesting and asking why on earth such a controversial figure was brought back? That is a reasonable question, but within the political framework of the Islamic Republic, democratic standards that function effectively in other sovereign nations simply do not operate in that manner. First off, there is no established system for formal questioning, transparency, or holding high-ranking officials accountable for their strategic missteps. In other words, nobody can simply tell an official, "Sir, you have suffered 16 major intelligence failures, so you must step aside." If such accountability truly existed, they would have to push the supreme leader himself aside too. Critics would say that during his tenure, the nation became deeply isolated, unable to export oil, perpetually under siege, and 52 of its senior officials were killed. In the political system of the Islamic Republic, fundamentally, one of the reasons the Islamic Republic is quick to decide and can make any decision is that there is no question and answer accountability. If this were anywhere else in the world, like, "Sir, how is it that 52 of your senior officials get killed? Yet you can't kill a single official from America or Israel. You can't kill a single commander from Israel or America." It could have basically sparked a massive national investigation. But in the Islamic Republic, they say no, this doesn't matter at all. On the other hand, can Hossein Taeb's critics come forward and criticize him, saying, "Why did you bring in a person with this track record?" I don't think so, because nobody is allowed to question the leader's decisions. And over the past 24 hours, a lot of the people who used to be critics of Taeb, seeing that Taeb has returned and returned with power, have turned into flatterers. There were figures on Clubhouse and on social media talking day and night against Hossein Taeb. Now they've put out a tweet saying, "Oh, a choice. The leader has made a strategic choice because they're scared. He was a powerful person. He has returned, and criticisms of him have completely stopped." Whereas from the time he was dismissed in 2022 until now, they were talking against him day and night on social media, Clubhouse, and all that. But, well, right now it's completely stopped because they see that this has caught the leader's attention. Thank you as well, my colleague Murad Vaisi from our other studio in Washington. We have a brief, exclusive window to broadcast live images of this breathtaking view directly to you, as you can clearly see on your screens. The solar eclipse is currently visible across various parts of Europe today. Millions of skygazers across the continent have turned their eyes upward in awe. The striking images you are seeing right now are coming to us live from Spain. For today's total solar eclipse on August 12, the moon's shadow path sweeps over Greenland and Iceland before finally reaching northern Spain. Additionally, these vivid live shots show Paris, right by the iconic Eiffel Tower, where enthusiastic crowds have gathered to witness this extraordinary phenomenon. In Spain, the solar eclipse happens right around sunset, and in parts of its path, the sky goes completely dark for about 2 minutes. You're seeing its live images right now from Spain. The time there should be, to give you the exact numbers, close to 9 p.m., 8:55 p.m. local time, and a rare solar eclipse that has been unprecedented in Spain for nearly a century. Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship Canada has notified Iranian immigrants who served in the IRGC that their applications will be rejected unless they provide a convincing explanation regarding their military service. In response to Iran International, the ministry stated that it has given these applicants an opportunity to present documentation and defend their cases. It noted that IRGC membership is distinct from mandatory military service, and conscription does not automatically make an individual inadmissible to Canada. Previously, the Canadian government had placed the IRGC on the country's official list of terrorist organizations. Our reporter, Masa Mortazavi, is joining us from Toronto. Masa, I know that this issue has caused concern for many Iranian immigrants to Canada. What do we know about this approach and the details of its implementation? Well, over the course of the past week, I personally received well over 100 messages from concerned individuals whose cases have run into this issue. They were sent an official letter called a Procedural Fairness Letter, or PFL, which gives them a remarkably short window of time to gather the necessary supporting documents and submit them to the Immigration and Refugee Board. This step is required so that their cases can be thoroughly reviewed on an individual case-by-case basis. The crucial question I directly asked Immigration, Refugees, and Citizens of Canada was reminding them that earlier in November, they had explicitly told us these cases would be reviewed individually. But why, first of all, have so many letters been sent? As far as I know, and as groups involved in this issue have announced, nearly 1,000 people have received this letter over the course of a few days. Their response was that we are offering this final opportunity to individuals who completed their military service in the IRGC to submit the required documentation. This does not mean their residency request is rejected, and the officer assigned to each file can still be the decision maker in the process of this case. Once again, their emphasis was that mandatory military service in the IRGC is not, in and of itself, a reason for rejecting these allocations. However, the difficulty these individuals face is that they must prove that, in terms of ideology and the activities they engaged in during their years of military service, they have no ties to the IRGC, and that this was purely mandatory service. Earlier, a legal precedent was established involving an individual named Mr. Vadiati, where the issue of coercion regarding military service was discussed, specifically what coercion entails. Coercion, for the Canadian government, meant that if these individuals had refused military service, their lives would have been endangered.
سربازان در ایران معنی دیگری داره. اینها از ادامه زندگیشون باز میمونن، نه اینکه لزوما جونشون به خطر بیفته. و حالا برای اینکه بتونن ثابت بکنن که تا چه لولی در اجبار قرار داشتن، چقدر ایدئولوژیشون فاصله داشته، اینها کارهایی هستش که باید به سختی انجام بدن و خب خانواده ها رو نگران کرده. علاوه بر اینکه خود این افراد مورد سوال قرار گرفتن، افرادی که با اونها در پرونده مشترک هستن مثل همسرانشون، فرزندانشون، اینها هم مشکل دارن و در نتیجه حالا تعداد زیادی بلا تکلیف هستن. باید ببینن که اداره مهاجرت و پناهندگی چه مسیری رو برای اینها در نظر گرفته. فرداد.
ممنونم از تو. مهسا مرتضوی از تورنتو، کانادا. Democratic Senators Richard Blumenthal and Adam Schiff are requesting comprehensive access to all potential communications exchanged between two private U.S. immigration detention facilities and diplomats representing the Islamic Republic. This formal inquiry follows a high-profile lawsuit filed by Iranian asylum seekers, who allege that the U.S. Department of Homeland Security improperly shared confidential information from their sensitive asylum protection files with the Iranian regime, while forcibly compelling them to participate in mandatory meetings with representatives from the interest section of the Islamic Republic of Iran. Our reporter, Marzieh Hosseini, joins us from the U.S. Congress. Marzieh, this is naturally a shocking and concerning report for Iranian asylum seekers. What details do we know about it?
Based on the published details, the U.S. government, at least according to the claims in this lawsuit, is alleged to have shared a set of information specifically concerning 300 Iranians who are set to be deported or have already been deported with the Islamic Republic. How so? We know they don't have direct diplomatic exchanges, but the Islamic Republic has an interest section here in Washington, operating under the Embassy of Pakistan, and it appears these Iranian immigrants, who we know have been undergoing deportation from the U.S. over the past year. It is reported that at least 160 people have been deported so far, with a total of around 500 people said to still be held in detention centers. Their immigration case files, detailed transcripts of their interviews with immigration officers, and all the information they submitted were fully handed over to this interest section. And beyond sharing this information, it's reported that these immigrants were compelled to meet with Islamic Republic officials residing in Washington. In this report, it is claimed that they were apparently told at times that all the information is in our hands, encouraging them to return to Iran. And while up until now, this was news that was mostly in federal court, because some of these Iranians, around 16 people, filed a lawsuit against ICE, or the U.S. Immigration Agency, and the Washington federal court is currently reviewing it. The news about it had also leaked out before. We know the New York Times had covered it extensively. However, what represents the new dimensions of this story is the U.S. Congress getting involved in this issue. Two Democratic senators stepped into the matter. They sent an official letter and asked all ICE detention facilities to provide them with all the detailed correspondence they had with the interest section of the Islamic Republic in Washington, and they want to know whether such an action actually took place. It is significant, even though ICE completely and absolutely denies this, on the grounds that asylum information is fundamentally considered strictly confidential. And apart from its confidentiality, its cooperation with the Islamic Republic is in itself another phase of the issue that could be a concern for the U.S. Congress. Many of these people, many of these individuals who have either been deported or are in line for deportation, were people who had political cases. They were active in the woman life freedom movement in Iran, or had converted their religion, or undergone gender transition and had cases of this sort. And now it is said that sharing this information with the Islamic Republic has put their lives in danger. And overall, this could turn this news and this case into one of the most sensitive human rights and immigration files here in Washington.
Thank you, Marzieh Hosseini from the U.S. Congress. Hossein Taeb, artistically known as Iraj, the veteran artist-singer and lasting voice of Iranian music, passed away at the age of 94. Iraj was born in Isfahan into an artistic family and learned the musical radifs and vocal repertoire under the tutelage of his grandfather and father, both of whom possessed beautiful voices. Over the decades, he was one of the regular voices on radio programs. Iraj also went on to perform songs and vocals for Persian films, and his voice, alongside actors like Fardad, is etched in the memories of different generations. During his fruitful life, Hossein Taeb sang more than 2,000 vocal pieces, ballads, and songs.
دست در حلقه آن زلف دوتا نتوان کرد تکه بر عهد تو تکه بر عهد تو باد صبا نتوان کرد.
We are pleased to be joined live from Istanbul by renowned film critic Ali Mosleh. Mr. Mosleh, a substantial portion of the legendary singer Iraj's widespread fame remains deeply tied to Iran's pre-revolutionary popular cinema. This includes not only the memorable soundtrack songs he performed, but also his role dubbing and serving as the singing voice for famous actors. How significantly do you believe this film legacy influenced his enduring fame and broad appeal among Iranian audiences? Yes, hello to you and all of the viewers. It certainly had the main impact on his career. Look, we actually had many important and talented singers on Radio Iran's prestigious Golha program, with both men and women singing classic Iranian vocals and traditional ballads, but none of them ever achieved Mr. Iraj's legendary fame. It was precisely because of this immense popularity that his powerful voice was featured throughout pre-revolutionary popular films. Apparently, statistics show he contributed to well over 100 films. Some even say 105 films. While this is entirely an unparalleled statistic, honestly, I don't think any other vocalist ever had such a historic track record. And the next point is that you actually mentioned Muhammad Ali Fardeen's name, the famous actor of pre-revolutionary cinema. A part of that iconic image Fardeen had in pre-revolutionary cinema was essentially achieved through Iraj's voice. This is a fact, and unfortunately, after the 79 revolution, he suffered the same fate, meaning when you look at traditional vocal, ballad, or classical singers in the pre-revolutionary era, none of them ran into such a solid wall like this. Meaning, in fact, the very fate that was sealed for the famous stars of pre-revolutionary cinema, stars like Muhammad Ali, Fardeen, Nasser Malik Motii, Behruz Vosugi, and so on and so forth, was sealed for Iraj as well, and unfortunately this happened, meaning that fame he achieved through his voice being heard on blockbuster and popular films caused him to be unable to continue his work for years, for decades, at the peak of his maturity and mastery, and to be banned from working, while other vocal masters of Iran continued their work after the revolution. And this, anyway, was a double-edged sword. Nevertheless, as we said, different generations, because Iraj's voice was captured in these movies, different generations, even after the revolution, became acquainted with the voice of this singer, who had an exceptionally powerful, full-range voice, and he kind of became immortalized. Mr. Mosleh, having briefly touched upon his notable contributions to cinema, please stay with us today. I would love for us to watch a short excerpt from one of his memorable performances in a celebrated Persian feature film.
Here I come once again, stepping eagerly into the light with a spirit so delightfully carefree, clever, and bright. Time and again I make my grand entrance, arriving every time with boundless flair, grace, and captivating mystique. It is truly I who have arrived, radiantly joyful, completely unburdened by grief, and wonderfully liberated. Driven by the warmth of sweet love, I arrived during this profoundly auspicious year.
That was an excerpt from the movie Crossroads Treasure. Mr. Mosleh, it seems back then there was a deconnection between music, singers like Mr. Iraj, and cinema, something we perhaps see less of today. Why is that? Look, the key reason is, and incidentally you just showed the film Crossroads Treasure, that this work represents a major turning point in mainstream Iranian commercial cinema, situated right on the eve of the Iranian New Wave era. That artistic movement kicked off during the late 1960s, but even with that cultural shift and its concurrence, to return directly to your core question, the new wave filmmakers heavily favored the modern voices of emerging pop singers. Yet despite those changing musical trends, Iraj's immense fame and beloved voice enduringly persisted across that entire decade, right up to the 1979 revolution. And at the same time, of course, films made by filmmakers like Nasser Tagvai, Masoud Kimiai, Amir Naderi, and others were also recognized by the voices of pop singers. This connection fell apart after the revolution because for about a decade and a half, maybe even 2 decades, using music in Iranian films was entirely banned. And when that opened up in the 90s, a new generation of pop singers emerged. And then Iranian traditional singing, tasnif, and classical music simply couldn't connect with the new cinema in that sense anymore.
به اون معنا با سینمای جدید نمیتونست ارتباطی.
So essentially everything we observe regarding music in post-revolution cinema is either a dramatic score, meaning pure instrumental background music, or features vocalists who emerged directly from the realm of mainstream pop music. In a way, one could argue this monumental cultural shift led to legendary singers like Iraj maintaining an untouchable and unrepeatable legacy status. This means that no matter how frequently pop singers' voices were integrated into popular cinematic soundtracks after the revolution, that level of mainstream exposure never occurred for folk, classical, and traditional vocalists, effectively leaving those rich musical genres entirely excluded from the silver screen's dynamic audio landscape. And I think that if on one hand, Iraj's pre-revolutionary cinematic fame was a double-edged sword that got him banned from performing for years, on the other hand, after the revolution, due to the shift in audience's taste and so on, Iraj kept his standing, and likely no singer will ever reach the point of becoming such an icon in popular cinema that you just cannot ignore their bond with film.
He had a very memorable and, as they say in English, unique voice. What qualities, what unique traits were in his voice and performance that made him so enduring?
Look, I genuinely believe the most decisive factor here was his remarkable flexibility. On one hand, Iraj had spent years learning from and collaborating with the ultimate masters of classical Iranian traditional music, prominent figures like Hassan Kasai, Habibullah Badi, Jalal Shahnaz, and several other legends. Yet, on the other hand, he possessed the rare ability to effortlessly transition into singing accessible popular compositions and lighthearted street or folk songs, perfectly exemplified by that iconic track from Crossroads' Treasure you just led. Ultimately, this extraordinary vocal versatility bridged 2 distinct artistic worlds, prompting both dedicated music connoisseurs and everyday moviegoers to wholeheartedly embrace his work. Both as a singer on, say, the Golha radio program, which was a heavier style of music, and as a singer of lighter, more popular tunes in mainstream commercial cinema. And in my view, this is the most defining quality in Mr. Iraj's portfolio as a singer, personally.
Very briefly, if you could say, do you think the new generation, Gen Z, can also connect with him?
I think Mr. Iraj. Anyway, you know his son was a singer too, and was very popular at one point, and they even released a joint album together. But in my opinion, my recommendation for the new generation is to go and discover Iraj's voice, because he was ahead of his time. He drew on cultural elements and the popular trends that existed back then. And he wasn't just a traditional singer or master of classical vocal arts and tasnif. So I think the younger generation might also be able to enjoy Iraj's voice through creative approaches like remixes and things like that.
Thank you. Ali Mosleh, film critic joining us from Istanbul. And thank you for tuning in to 24 tonight. We end this broadcast with another song by Iraj called Alefa, the alphabet.
Ah, I say you have finely arched brows that delicately frame your luminous days. Oh, my sweet arched-browed darling. B, I say you are ever tall, elegant, and graceful like a slender willow tree. Oh, my lovely and fragrant flower. K, I want you, my sweetest, dearest darling, to playfully toddle right over to me across the open room. B, so that I may happily spin around you in pure joy and soft and tenderly press my lips to yours. J, you never gave me a clear answer as to why I kept endlessly wanting you, yet I truly desire you solely for myself. D, my poor your heart remains helplessly held hostage each day by your loving heart. D. I have truly become your restless seeker wandering everywhere in search of you, so please do not turn and walk away from me. D. You wear such a remarkably pretty, vibrant, and colorful headscarf. Z and Z and Z. Z. Do you truly know deep within your mind how I am doing through all these lonely passing days? S. I want to say you are glowing, shining, and silvery body beneath the quiet starlight. Shh. I want to say you possess such delightfully sweet lips and captivating, wondrously sweet charms that completely enchant my entire soul.